West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We start with a break in the January 6th investigation. A major witness is going to testify. Trump White House counsel Pat Cipollone will go under oath. His lawyer indicated a transcribed interview, but his testimony will be on camera this Friday. Cipollone knows it all, and this news is huge for the probe. He was witness to talks on seizing voting machines, sending fake electors to Congress, and was in the West Wing on January 6th. He has spoken to the committee before in an informal setting, but this testimony is under oath, stemming from a subpoena, coming just after the bombshell testimony on Trump's violent coup from Cassidy Hutchinson.
On January 3rd, Mr. Cipollone had approached me. Mr. Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, "We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us." Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office. I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, "Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable." Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the Electoral College count.
He warned Trump's team of, quote, every crime imaginable. And specifically mentioned, too, he was in that Oval Office meeting when Trump floated the idea of decapitating the DOJ to install loyalist Jeffrey Clark. In sworn testimony, Jared Kushner talked about Cipollone's threats to resign.
Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, "Oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens." So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
Remember what Jared said. I was working on the other conspiracy, so I couldn't work on that conspiracy. Look, there are so many key questions that Cipollone will be asked, and they will go public. Also breaking today, another new witness will testify live at the hearing on Tuesday. Sarah Matthews, a former deputy press secretary for Trump, will go under oath and will be in the spotlight. Matthews resigned from the administration after the insurrection, saying she was, quote, deeply disturbed. The hearing will focus on Trump world's links to extremist groups. Here's what a committee investigator said about Matthews.
I actually led the staff part of the interview of Sarah Matthews. I can tell you that she is an extremely credible witness. She'll be able to help fill in some of those gaps about what happened on the build-up to January 6th and January 6th itself.
So what exactly does Matthews know about these groups? We know Roger Stone was with the Proud Boys on the morning of January 6th outside the Willard Hotel insurrection headquarters. New evidence revealed a meeting between Proud Boys and Oath Keeper leaders on January 5th. and the evidence of coordination.
The Proud Boys established a command structure in anticipation of coming back to D.C. on January 6th. The Oath Keepers began planning to block the peaceful transfer of power shortly after the November 3rd election. The night of January 5th, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's probably about 300 Proud Boys. They're marching eastbound.
The Proud Boys instigated the first breach of the Capitol just before 1 o'clock p.m.
The Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in two stack formations.
And now Giuliani is doing another Giuliani under criminal investigation. He's back on camera saying this.
They're going to try to charge him with that, which is why he probably should have pardoned himself. Not because he committed a crime, don't you understand me? Because these people are criminals. They frame people.
As Ari says, pardons are for criminals. And as the former SDNY chief, Giuliani knows that. Joining me now is my fellow Wahoo, Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, and Barbara McQuaid, former federal prosecutor. Thank you all so much for joining us to start off today. Barbara, I'm going to begin with you because there's so much of this that I think is just sort of pouring out every single week, which makes me scream and makes regular people scream. We now have people backing up Sarah Matthews saying, look, everything that Cassidy Hutchinson said is true. What she talked about in the car, what she talked about as far as the attack, what she talked about in the room. How important is it for the overall sort of legal case that may be left at the DOJ's door that we now have more people coming forward and backing up the testimony that we heard in the last January 6th hearing?
Oh, it's very important. Number one, corroboration is very valuable. Sometimes people might think that a witness either misheard something or didn't remember it correctly or is even lying about something. But if you have another witness who can independently verify the same facts, that tends to enhance the believability about it. I also think Sarah Matthews could be an interesting witness, just as Cassidy Hutchinson was, in what I would refer to as a bridge witness. That is, even if she didn't see things directly, she may be able to lead investigators to additional witnesses or describe bits of conversations or things that she heard that can open new lines of investigation. So she seems like a very interesting and promising witness.
Professor Murray, the next hearing, or it's going to be about sort of Proud Boys and white nationalist connections and everything else like that. What is the kind of thing that is sort of a definite link, right? You know, look, just because I have a meeting with a member of the Klan doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a member. Just because I have a meeting with the Proud Boys doesn't necessarily mean that I am directing their behavior, even if I might be coordinating. What has to be shown or what should be explained in next week's meeting to say, look, these people were in the room, you know, it's clue, in the room with a wrench, you know, with the maid in order to make sure that we can draw this connection here legally and politically?
Well, to be clear, Jason, this is a congressional testimony. It's not a criminal prosecution. This is not a criminal trial. So the standard of proof is very different. This is just testimony given under oath. And I imagine what the select committee is looking for is, as Barbara said, more corroboration that there are actually very established links here. If this were to go forward and to be subject of a DOJ prosecution for conspiracy or to link anyone in the White House to the charges of seditious conspiracy that have already been leveled against individuals like Stuart Rhodes, then I think you actually need to have some kind of connection, whether it's in the form of messages or communications, and it doesn't have to be a lot in order to establish that there was some kind of conspiracy afoot. Conspiracy is known as the darling of the prosecutor's nursery because it takes so little to establish it and to link up a number of different people in this theory of group liability. So again, just links between these individuals who have already been identified with these extremist groups and those in the White House, I think would be quite profitable.
Barbara, we've got some sound talking about people being concerned about being prosecuted. We have some sound from Roger Stone right now. His thoughts about someone who's going to try and avoid future investigations. What's your thoughts on the other side?
I think he announces sooner rather than later. I think he announces as early as July.
As early as this July? You mean like a week? He could be announcing the 2024 run? Wow.
Barbara, look, I understand that Trump may have an interest in announcing early so that people are obligated to pay attention to him so he can use, you know, campaign and PAC money for whatever sort of conspiratorial things he wants to engage in. But from a legal standpoint, how How does announcing that you're running for president possibly insulate you from prosecution? Explain to me in the audience why it would make a difference if he's announced or not announced when it comes to being investigated.
I don't think it would matter in this instance, but here's why it's relevant. The Justice Department does have a policy that says it should never take action for the purpose of influencing political outcomes. In some ways, they shouldn't even take action that might have the effect of influencing political outcomes. So for that reason, the Justice Department usually stands down in what they call a cooling off period for roughly 60 days or so around an election. So I would say as we face primary season in the spring of 2024 or the November 2024 season, I think you would see the Justice Department cool off any investigation or any charges. But we're a long ways away from that. And so I think whether he announces in July or 2023, I don't think it's going to make a difference in the investigations being done by DOJ or Georgia or this committee.
They cool off anymore, I think we'll be frozen. I haven't seen much heat yet. Melissa, I got to ask you this. One other thing that's of interest is Republicans have already said, look, if we retake the House this fall, we're going to start investigating members of the January 6th committee. They're basically already planning their own counter investigation of the initial investigation. The DOJ is not necessarily going to be any more obligated to listen to those results than they are what's happening with the actual January 6th committee. What could be the consequences, though, as far as information being shared? If Republicans take over the House, they shut down January 6th, could they hold information from the DOJ? Could they snatch documentation back? What could be the real consequences to a Republican House takeover this fall as far as this investigation goes?
Yeah. Well, Jason, the question assumes that the individuals who would be taking back the House would be institutionalists who would follow established protocols. Like, we know that that's already not the case. So it could be that they do things that are perhaps unorthodox, things that we haven't seen before in terms of withholding information, asking for evidence back, asking for information to be sent back to Congress. It's all very unclear. But we do know that the fact that they are already contemplating the prospect of a retaliatory investigation of an investigation shows how serious they are and how close this select committee has come and how unnerving the findings have been for those who are outside of it. So who knows what will happen? But, having that kind of power will certainly lead to some interesting shifts in how business is done at the Capitol.
And I have to follow up and say this, the idea that they're already planning extended testimony says to me all the more reason why the January 6th committee should continue. I don't understand why we only have 2 more episodes left of this most important investigation in this conspiracy when you know that the other side is planning bad faith investigations all the way until 2024. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It is Thursday, the 7th of July of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Okay, well, looks like Cipollone is set to testify to the January 6th committee, and can't wait for that. I believe, Friday, tomorrow he does a video deposition, and then on Tuesday we'll have another hearing in which we will probably see tapes of that deposition. So looking forward to that. Now, of course, we find out that there's only going to be a couple of more public hearings. They can't be serious. They should be doing this over the summer so we get closer to the election, please. If anybody knows how America works, is that they have a very short memory. Or actually, I might just call it an attention span. Give them too much time, and you'll almost forget that a bunch of kids in Uvalde got massacred by a high-powered rifle in the hands of a mad person. Yeah, who remembers that? Of course, there was a report that came out that showed that misstep after misstep. I heard it analyzed, particularly in the Uvalde situation, where cops really have a hard time shooting people. They do? Jeez. I guess they didn't recognize the shooter as being Hispanic, or maybe they could have mistaken him for black. They would have had no problem then. Please. Cops have a hard time shooting people. The problem we have with cops shooting people is because we're picking them up right out of war zones and then putting them into the streets of America and then saying, hey, protect and serve. So fill the avenue with lead and we'll figure it out later. That's the libertarian viewpoint, you know. Don't worry, you can always go to court. Yeah, but I'll be dead. Yeah, but at least you'll go to court. I like to stop the problem before it happens. Libertarians say, just let the problem happen, we'll take care of it later. God, that's so irresponsible. And then we have to listen to them as being the arbiters of morality. All of this is because they think that we are all a bunch of mud people and we have no business thinking, let alone trying to tell other people how they should be living their lives. All right. When I was, I mentioned this on social media, but I'll just repeat it to those of you who don't delve into social media so deep. Anyway, when I was a young altar boy, I was sort of led to believe that those who had like buku amounts of money, who got buku rich, that they were somehow touched by God. They were anointed by God. And so therefore, you know, they might have had the answers to the mysteries of the universe. And then as I got older, I realized any dimwit can make money. Jeez, all you have to do is have a lack of morality so you can steal. Because that's essentially what a lot of people do to get rich, is that instead of paying people their due, they just pocket the money and go away and say, hey, deal with it. We'll deal with it tomorrow, don't worry. Worst tippers I've ever been around are those who are like buku rich. In fact, you can hardly get them to pay their share. God, let alone you have to cover their tip too. That's how they get rich. Yep, they shortchange everything and everyone. And we're supposed to stand back and let them tell us what morality is? That we have the stain of, well, I don't know, Cain upon us, so therefore we're second-class citizens? I don't get it. Though it is true, I think maybe a lot of it has to do with the fact that they know, even if they were born into it, because that's even when you should be even more concerned, that they got a bunch of money that really wasn't due them. Meaning that it came by subterfuge or other means to separate money from another person. So yeah, I came to believe then that instead of being anointed by God, they made a pact with the devil, a moral pact. You give up your morality, you get rich. Now, a lot of people don't have to give up their morality because they have no morality to give up. And those are the easiest then, aren't they? To go ahead and say, sue me. I'm not paying for those chandeliers that I ordered on special order. Sue me. That's how Trump gets away with his BS. Then he has enough money to just string it out, and the poor contractor says, I'm barely, I was making what, 5% off of that item? Screw it. Cheaper to give it up. A lot of crook businessmen know that, like Trump. It astounds me that people are coming to the conclusion that, wow, Trump is a crook. He's been a crook his whole life. He was born into it. God, I mean, people in New York knew. All you had to do was follow the idiot. In fact, you didn't even have to be in New York. I always make the joke that I knew he was a crook before he got kicked out of the Sharper Image. And I got to say, long before he even got his stuff in the sharper image, we all knew that Trump was a crook. Conspicuous consumption, the braggadocio, the narcissism, I mean, it was all on display. The term trophy wife came about because of Trump. Talk about the lessening of morality in America, and they're trying to blame the hippies? Please. Peace, love, and understanding didn't get us where we are. Conspicuous consumption did. And the arrogance behind it. And we're supposed to defer to that? I am not going to. Because it was a short step from that libertine lifestyle to the rigid order of Nazism. And here we are. Jeez. All right. Well, like I said, we should be carrying on these hearings through the summer. It's all reruns on all the other shows. Let's get some live, fresh material out there and programming, and people will follow it. And then when the midterms come up in the fall, they'll have it fresh in their brain. That's just me. Jesus. Okay. Well, hopefully something will come of it. I'm not so sure anymore. Oh, boy. But I will say this. This is nothing compared to what a large segment of our society, of our population, has had to go through since they were brought over here on ships in chains. Have they given up on the idea of America? I mean, every excuse to just say, screw this place. But there's promise here. Because we can look around amongst each other and say, you know what? The glory of what it meant to be an American still exists. I mean, here we are. Yes, and here we are. Let us hope that our efforts, and that means getting out to vote. You know, voting harder just means maybe you need to go out and volunteer and walk some precincts. I hear this whining like, oh, they're telling me to vote harder. How much harder do I have to vote? Well, how about getting involved in the actual voting process? And that means getting other people to vote, you idiot. How about listening to people like Denise Oliver Velez? Okay? Don't listen to me. I'm just an old guy. Okay? I would, listen to a respected elder. Okay? I know elders aren't due respect in this weird society we have. Kids who have had maybe voted 5 times in their lives are now giving it up. Oh, it doesn't do anything. This struggle's been going on for hundreds of years, and there's a large segment of our society and population who are not giving up on the hope and promise of what it is to be America. Equal protection, due process for all. What's wrong with that? Only a Nazi would be against that. Well, not only Nazis, but predominantly ones that are against it are, our special brand of Nazi. We have them, too. And they're goose-stepping all over the Constitution and everything that we hold near and dear. And that includes all the stuff that was like conspicuous consumption that we might have moderated a little bit. Okay? As if wearing Patagonia isn't conspicuous. But still, I mean, there might be a little bit of thought behind Patagonia's product and, I don't know, someone else's. But that's neither here nor there, because none of it matters when, I don't know, maybe they're going to keep us happy by saying, go to the mall, shop, don't worry about your loss of freedoms. How about the loss of life? Well, that's the trade-off you get so that somebody else has the right to carry a gun. Jeez. How about somebody's right to use, I don't know, a vegetable spray on their pants? Why does the person carrying a gun have more rights than the person who wants to use a vegetable spray on their pants? Jeez. They're both carrying implements of, I don't know, flying objects. Oh, well. Modern times. What are you going to do? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to give you a rundown of what we have curated for the rest of the show because, once again, as you know, we can just go on and on and on, and we do. So we might as well get back to the orderly part of the show. Yeah, seemingly orderly. And that is the curated part that we actually take time to build these news reads because, hey, this is a salon and we'd like to have a few topics to put out there to, chew around, chew up, and spit out. No, we don't do that here at this salon. Okay, on the rest of the menu here as we begin in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the Biden administration has proposed more flexibility for student debt forgiveness. And there's still going to be a large segment of, people who voted maybe 3 or 4 times in their lives saying, he's lying to us. Yeah, well, get out and vote. What do you want, Nazis? Let's see. Oh, the Department of Justice is investigating potential civil rights violations in Texas's multi-billion-dollar border security mission. Yeah, now I hear that they're going to take that money from COVID relief in Texas and Florida and hand it out as tax breaks. Totally against the issuance of the funds. Why don't we take it back with interest? And contact has been restored with a $32.7 million NASA spacecraft headed to lunar orbit. After the break, we move to the chef's table where a key witness in the corruption trial of Bibi Netanyahu testified that her billionaire boss ordered her to deliver gifts and expensive jewelry to the then Israeli premier. And Cairo's historic Nile River houseboats are being removed in a draconian government push to redesign the city in the image of the United Arab Emirates skyline. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page there to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we're able to put those dollars into a kitty. And, like a ceramic type one, not the real kind. Okay, not the purring kind. The ceramic kind. Anyway, we pool those funds, and then we're able to pay our bills, which allows us to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance that has been resisting for over 11 years of 24/7, 365 resistance broadcasting, bringing you voices and hopefully some entertainment and intellectually uplifting content for your intellectually uplifting, contented pleasure. And we do that because we do take it seriously as our civic duty. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill that civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom. Tom takes care of that for us and a lot more. He and Kelly do a lots. Thank you both. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. The show notes and links diary automatically gets posted 10 minutes before showtime because that's how it works. And then I scramble to get that linked up on social media. But regardless, the show notes and links are where the real reportage can be found. And so there you go. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts, where you can also find the show notes and links because they'll be there too. But you can pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. And, of course, yes, I should remind myself as well as you that the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Okay. Too early in the morning to be slurring words because I've had, I think, the adequate amount of coffee. You would think that it would be okay, but who knows? Anyway, let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it's by Colin Binkley out of the Associated Press. New rules proposed by the Biden administration yesterday, Wednesday, would make it easier for borrowers to get their federal student debt forgiven through several existing programs. The action is intended to overhaul relief programs that have been criticized for their burdensome paperwork requirements and long processing times. It builds on the administration's efforts to expand targeted debt cancellation for certain borrowers, while President Joe Biden considers broader student debt forgiveness. We are committed to fixing a broken system, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona said in a statement. If a borrower qualifies for student loan relief, it shouldn't take mountains of paperwork or a law degree to obtain it. The proposal would smooth out a debt forgiveness process for students whose colleges deceive them, along with other programs for borrowers who are disabled and those whose careers are in public service. It is unlikely to open debt forgiveness to huge swaths of borrowers, but it is meant to make it easier for those who already qualify. The Education Department plans to finalize the rules no later than July 1st of 2023. Now, some of the most significant changes are to the Borrower Defense Program, which allows students to get their loans erased if their colleges lie to them or otherwise commit fraud. The program has seen an explosion of claims over the last decade, starting with an Obama-era crackdown on for-profit colleges. But political and legal battles have led to a backlog of more than 200,000 applications, with some borrowers waiting years for a decision. Instead of requiring the government to review each claim individually, a rule set by the Trump administration, the new proposal would allow the Education Department to process groups of similar claims together. If a college is found to have deceived students about their job prospects after graduating, for example, the department would be able to combine all claims from that school and approve them in one action. That option would be available if there's evidence of widespread fraud by a school, determined by state or federal authorities, or through a class action lawsuit. AP staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. The U.S. Department of Justice is investigating potential civil rights violations in Texas's multi-billion-dollar border security mission that has given the National Guard arrest powers and seen state authorities bus migrants to Washington, D.C., according to public records. A lawyer for the state police agency acknowledged the federal probe of Governor Greg Abbott's initiative to curb people crossing from Mexico in a May email. The state prison system also cited a formal investigation and a letter seeking to withhold public records related to Operation Lone Star, and those were obtained by ProPublica and the Texas Tribune. The investigation comes to light as a human smuggling attempt that left 53 people dead in the sweltering tractor trailer highlights the limits of state and federal border controls. Crossings along the entire southern border are at or near their highest point in about 2 decades. Last year, Abbott, a Republican seeking re-election, rolled out a massive law enforcement apparatus on the border, alleging inaction by Joe Biden's administration. The surge in officers has driven arrests, mostly for trespassing, low levels of pot, and other minor crimes that have little to do with border security. Some of those detained on these minor violations have spent weeks in state jails. The emails from Texas Department of Public Safety officials indicate federal authorities are looking at whether the operation may have broken a law against discrimination based on race, color, or national origin by organizations receiving federal funds. A spokesperson for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division declined to comment. A Texas Department of Public Safety spokesman did not respond to a request for comment. Since April, Abbott has also offered migrants bus rides to Washington, D.C., saying he was taking the immigration issue to Congress's doorstep. So far, about 3,000 immigrants have taken the trip at a cost of more than $5 million. Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. NASA said yesterday, Wednesday, that contact has been restored with its $32.7 million spacecraft headed to the moon to test out a lopsided lunar orbit. Contact was lost after one successful communication and a second partial one on Monday after the spacecraft left Earth's orbit on its way to the moon. The spacecraft spent nearly a week circling the globe after launching from New Zealand on June 28th. According to NASA, data shows the spacecraft is in good health and operated safely on its own while it was out of contact with Earth. The cause of the communications drop-off is under investigation. The 55-pound satellite is the size of a microwave oven and will be the first spacecraft to try out this oval orbit, which is where NASA wants to put its Gateway outpost. Gateway would serve as a staging point for astronauts before they descend to the lunar surface. The orbit balances the gravities of Earth and the moon, and so requires little maneuvering and therefore fuel, and allows a satellite or a space station to stay in constant contact with the Earth. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. They say you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. But what if you had access to a remote-controlled carnivorous plant? Because researchers have engineered a bio-inspired system, an artificial neuron, if you will, that can trigger the snap of a Venus flytrap.
Hi, my name is Simone Fabiano, an associate professor at Linköping University in Sweden.
Fabiano designed the trap-springing device using nerve cells as a kind of bio-based blueprint.
The way our biological neurons work is that they integrate information from different input over time, perform computation, and communicate the results to other neurons by means of voltage pulses.
Now, standard silicone-based systems can also deliver electrical pulses, but if you want to couple them with something living to produce bionic prosthetics or engineer any kind of brain-machine interface, well, they suffer from several limitations.
Such as rigidity, poor biocompatibility, complex circuit structures, and operation mechanisms that are fundamentally different from those of biological systems.
To smooth biological integration, Fabiano built his system from polymers that conduct both electrons, like everyday electronics, and ions, which is how neurons get things done. It's the ions that
enable communication between biological and artificial neurons.
Each part of the artificial neuron, which the researchers describe in the journal Nature, has a direct counterpart in its biological role model.
We have an input terminal that acts as the biological neuron's dendrite.
That dendrite collects the incoming electrical signals and sends them to a capacitor, which, like a neuronal cell body, integrates the information. Then, once the voltage reaches a specific threshold, a pulse is fired along organic amplifiers that mimic a nerve cell axon.
We use the ionic concentration-dependent switching characteristics of our transistors to modulate the frequency of spiking, which is to a large extent analogous to biological systems.
So, the ions control the current that flows from the faux neuron to its target, in this case a live Venus flytrap, triggering the rapid-fire closure of its leafy appendages. All in all, a dramatic demonstration of the potential of neuromorphic design that should give interested engineers and interloping fruit flies something to watch out for. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. That all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights was self-evident to Americans at the time of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. They were a deeply religious people who were very familiar with the idea of universal human equality from the teachings of Christianity and from English republicanism. They were familiar with the idea of inalienable rights from the political writings of John Locke's Second Treatise and other English sources. The pursuit of happiness would have been a self-evident consequence of the natural right to liberty, which no supporter of the revolution doubted. The colonists also believed strongly that the just powers of government are derived from the consent of the governed, and that the governed have a right to revolution when government betrays its trust. Again, these ideas came from John Locke and English republicanism. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Local heroes faced threats.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Local heroes faced threats was a recent headline for the Associated Press story about the, quote, chilling, tearful testimony from local election officials to the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol and the efforts to prevent Joe Biden from being sworn in as president. Those local officials in key battleground states testified about being leaned on to reject ballots and to submit alternate electors who would vote contrary to the results of the elections in their states. As one official put it, there were a lot of threats wishing death upon me. Congressman Benny Thompson, the chair of the January 6th committee, praised those local officials who stood for accuracy and honesty in the counting of ballots, characterizing them as the backbone of democracy. Chairman Thompson succinctly summarized the threat this way. A handful of election officials in key states stood between Donald Trump and the upending of democracy. Although the January 6th committee has not yet written its report, one conclusion already is clear. The United States has taken great pride in the strength of our democracy, and yet it turns out that our democracy actually is fragile.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1905. It was the 10th day of the convention in Chicago, Illinois, where William Big Bill Haywood of the Western Federation of Miners and Daniel De Leon and Eugene V. Debs of the Socialist Party founded the Industrial Workers of the World. The IWW, or Wobblies as they're sometimes called, was formed in part in response to the American Federation of Labor's opposition to organizing unskilled labor. Bill Haywood proclaimed in the founding convention, "This is the Continental Congress of the working class. We are here to confederate the workers of this country into a working class movement that shall have for its purpose the emancipation of the working class from the slave bondage of capitalism." In the first 2 decades of the 1900s, the IWW cut across traditional guild and union lines to organize workers in a variety of trades and industries. Many notable people were either members or supporters of the IWW, including Mother Jones, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, and Joe Hill. Hill, along with Ralph Chaplin and T-Bone Slim, compiled a book of labor songs in 1909 known as the Little Red Songbook.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me.
The Wobblies were opposed to U.S. involvement in World War I, which they called a war for capitalism and empire. However, in 1917, Congress passed the Espionage Act, which exacted harsh financial penalties or even jail time for anyone speaking out against the war. One of the people arrested under the Espionage Act was Bill Haywood. In the aftermath, the IWW declined in membership and influence. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high nearly the same as yesterday, about 82 to 83, and mostly cloudy apparently this morning, though right at this moment is quite clear, so we'll call it partly cloudy. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, then mostly clear tonight, with lows in the mid to upper 50s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. A few clouds from time to time tomorrow, with highs inching up into the upper 80s, but the winds will remain out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Well, we do have an update in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon for our coronavirus infections and decease totals. And of course, they have increased. We now stand at 471,078 confirmed cases of infection, and our deceased have sadly increased since the last update by about a half dozen, and we stand at 555. Let's see. Oh, grass pollen is rated high right outside the window here in Rogue River proper, and I've got the window open, so I'm not sneezing right now, and that's a good thing. The air quality index is good at 20 parts per million. Let's hope people don't burn their trash, because for some reason they're allowed to do that. The daytime UV index is very high, so if the burning trash doesn't burn you, the solar rays will. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.02 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at a sticky 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 74 degrees and fair. Paris is 71 and cloudy. Rome is 90 degrees and partly cloudy, and they remain with their heat advisory that affects critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 75 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 76 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 83 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 74 degrees and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 52 and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Emily Rose of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A key witness in the corruption trial of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has testified that her billionaire boss ordered her to deliver gifts of champagne, cigars, and expensive jewelry to the then-Israeli premier in a scandal at the center of the country's political crisis. The expensive gifts lavished upon the former Israeli leader by wealthy friends are the subject of one of the 3 corruption cases against Netanyahu. He stands accused of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes, charges he has denied and dismissed as part of an attempt to oust him from office, which usually happens when you break the law. The Netanyahus love gifts, and they love pink champagne and cigars for Bibi. Horace Klein, the longtime assistant of one of the former premier's friends, testified using the prime minister's nickname. The ongoing trial, already in its 2nd year, is addressing allegations that while in office, Netanyahu accepted gifts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from Hollywood film producer Arnon Milchan and Australian billionaire James Packer.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Ahmed Hatim and Sami Magdi of the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. With verdant gardens on one side and water on the other, they were an anomaly in a city bordered on 3 sides by desert. For decades, Cairo's houseboats occupied prime waterfront real estate, offering residents a front-row seat to the passing Nile River with its water taxis, anglers, sport rowers, and occasional family of ducks. But it is coming to an end. A government push to remove the string of floating homes from the city's Nile River banks has dwindled their numbers from several dozen to just a handful. Houseboats have been a Cairo tradition since the early 1800s, and government efforts to remove them have drawn criticism in Egypt, where residents are mourning the loss of not just their homes, but a way of life. Critics say the move is part of a series of development decisions by the government of El-Sisi that endangers the city's heritage. The point is that they really don't seem to understand that there is value, intangible values. There is value in history, said Adaf Soif, a prize-winning Egyptian novelist who bought and renovated her houseboat after moving back to Egypt from the United Kingdom 10 years ago. The floating homes are being removed or renovated to develop the waterfront commercially, according to officials. They have not released detailed plans of what that entails. In recent years, a surge of infrastructure projects by El-Sisi's government has drawn concern about heritage sites, including an ancient cemetery and historic gardens. In late June, residents of at least 30 houseboats were ordered to evacuate within 20 days. Located on a stretch of the river in the working-class neighborhoods of Imbaba and Kitkat, they sat opposite the upscale residential island of Zamalek. The eviction notices came after years of government pressure in the form of increasingly expensive mooring licenses. For instance, SWEEP have been required to pay about $3,800 US for a mooring license in 2018. That was up from $22 in 2013. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.